Okay, before I begin, let me just say that this year should be a blessing and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Ruvain and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf, Ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. They should all have tremendous blessings. You know, when we take a look around us, what is going on, it's astounding. You know, people are walking around confused, and not only confused, but in many ways mortified. The amount of evil in the world is beyond belief, especially when you take a look at America, what is happening in America. And then you look at the fact that there's a tremendous amount of evil being generated in the world. You have a new axis of evil. You have China and Russia. You have Iran. You have North Korea, and so on. You know, you just have even Saudi Arabia apparently has joined Iran. So you have that. You have the tremendous amount of turmoil and upheaval in Israel. The war, as we will speak about, the war between, you know, the Supreme Court and the Knesset, the concept of judicial reform. I mean, we take a look around this and we ask ourselves, what in the world is going on? So I thought that as the, the reintroduction of these Shiurim, that I would talk about the logic or the rationale of what's happening and why, based on, of course, the divine agenda. You know, this isn't a news report. What it is really an understanding of how all of this really fits into the upcoming Messianic era. That's really what it's all about. But the question is, how does all this fit? So therefore, I thought I would devote, certainly this particular shiur to these ideas. So if everybody's ready, then I will begin to talk about these ideas. Now, what's important to know, obviously some of the ideas I will say, I have said in the past, but in order to bring up, new ideas and the new context and so on, it's important to give a full display, sort of everything. Now, like I said, it's very confusing in terms of what is going on. But when you take a look at everything, what's happening in America and the entire world, especially what's happening in Israel, there's a tremendous amount of, like I said, turmoil, upheaval, and so on, and chaos. So the question is, how do we understand all this? Well, the main idea, the main theme of all of this is that we are rapidly approaching the Messianic era. And therefore, that gives rise to a certain amount of what's called spiritual necessities. And the spiritual necessities, in order for them to occur, they generate historical events, which in a certain sense will bring to fruition the spiritual necessities. And that's really the way to understand all this. We are rapidly approaching the end of time, because the world has reached a certain level of tumah, tremendous amount of contamination and evil, which I call the Memteshai Tumah, the 49 levels of evil. I shouldn't say evil, really the 49 levels of immorality and tumah, contamination, pollution, and so on. And as a result of that, we are rapidly heading toward the end of time to bring the Mashiach. So what that does, that necessitates certain things. Specifically, things that have to happen to the Jewish people, and also things that have to happen to the world, especially Edom. Now, the last kingdom, that's what the way Torah describes it, that the Jewish people are subjugated to, is Edom, Esav. That is the last kingdom, empire, that the Jews will be subjected to in terms of persecution, and therefore, obviously, God has to deal with that. And that's a major task of bringing the Mashiach. What happens to Edom? Now, there are several things that we could identify in terms of the theme. And each one of these things will have its own historical event, its own happenings. So the first thing, which we know because I had mentioned it, and most people are now aware of it, but certainly were not, is that Edom will not be destroyed. Edom has to do tshuva. And I mentioned, certainly a long time ago, why? Because ultimately speaking, even though Esav in the Torah became a Rasha, however, the prophecy is Rav Yavoy Tzoyer, is that the older will serve the younger. And we know what that means. That means the concept of tikkun, that the younger, who is Yaakov Avinu, and his descendants, do the tikkun process, which we know what it is. It is to bring God back into Olam Hazeh, where everybody will now see that there's a thing called a spiritual reality, and that God is the supreme being, that he's really the only being. You see, and then ultimately the world will transform into Olam Haba, the future world. And that's the job of Yaakov. And it is a job of Esav to, of course, assist them. Now we know, because Esav, as I mentioned many times, Esav himself is an Ov, or was an Ov, a patriarch. And of course he's given that up, became a Rasha. So Esav does his job by allowing Yaakov to be punished or suffer as a result of the sins of Yaakov and his descendants. So that becomes the job of Esav, or Edom. So in that sense, he's still involved in the tikkun process, never ended. So, but eventually, Esav's job will stop, the job of persecuting the Jews, and Esav will then, or Edom, will then assist the Jews to do the tikkun. So the ultimate prophecy of the Torah must happen. So Rav Yavoy Tzoyer must happen in terms of Esav, being part of the tikkun process. That means that Esav does tshuva, you see. But in order for Esav to do tshuva, so that's the first theme of what is going on today. And of course we witness that, which I'll talk about. The second theme is that, wait a minute, what about Esav, all the evil that he has done to the Jewish people? Now, the evil that Esav has done to the Jewish people basically is of two kinds. The first kind is where Esav, or Edom, has persecuted the Jews, punished the Jews, you see, and killed them, slaughtered them, butchered them, and so on, over the thousands of years that Esav has been in control. And we know who Esav was. Esav basically was Rome, right? That was Esav in his form as an empire. And then, of course, we know also, which I've said many times, is that Rome became Christianity. So Christianity is really Edom or Esav, right? And not only has Rome persecuted the Jews, but the same thing with Christianity. We know that. And so on. So they have to be punished. That's the second theme that has to happen, right? But like I said, there are two levels of punishment. One is that they have to be punished for the enormous amount of harm that they've done to the Jewish people. So that's the first type of evil that they have done that they have to be punished. And the second is that they have created an environment that enables or encourages Jews to sin. I have mentioned before many times that we do not realize the justice of God, to what extent it goes. We think, well, if you do evil, well, of course, then God will execute justice or judgment against you, right, and punish you. But it's much greater than that. Any evil that can be attributed to you, in other words, that you've contributed to, no matter how remote it is, and no matter how far away you are a cause, there will be retribution. That's how far justice goes. People don't realize that. I use an example, the border of the United States, where Biden is allowing all these illegal people to come in and so on. But what's really terrible is all the fentanyl coming in, where 300 people die every day. Now, Biden probably thinks, well, he's not killing the people. He's not bringing in fentanyl. But he doesn't understand that people who are dying, American citizens, who are dying every day, and I mentioned 300, right, that Biden will be considered a murderer. He doesn't understand that because he is contributing to the evil or to the murder, the death of American citizens. And he is responsible for that because he's the president. That's how far justice will go, that he will be severely punished. He has no concept of what's going to happen to him. And all the people who have done tremendous evil, when COVID was around, people who have denied people medication, people don't understand the extent of justice. Like I said, if you have contributed, it doesn't make a difference how remote the contribution is, you will be punished. So therefore, Esav has contributed through the civilization of Esav, which is Western civilization. They have contributed to allow Jews to sin or to encourage Jews to sin by the enormous decadent type of civilization that they have created. And therefore only God knows the exact amount that they have caused or contributed to. So therefore God has to punish Esav for that also. He's going to punish Esav for the sins of the Jews that were committed because of the civilization that Esav set up to encourage people, right, to make it easy for people to sin. In any case, so that's a second theme. Edom has to be punished. The third theme is that justice demands that evil have its last fling. In other words, because evil says, why should I be restricted and held back? So God says, you're right. In other words, because the world deserves the full thrust of evil, because they're the ones who are creating it. So therefore, evil, like I said, has its last fling. And we are watching, right, the dominion, the tremendous amount of success and strength and proliferation of evil. So that's a third theme. And this, of course, happens at the end of time. And then, of course, we have to watch the beginning of the overthrow of Esav. Because eventually, of course, they have to be overthrown before the Messianic era. There you are. So you have at least 4 themes or spiritual happenings before the Mashiach comes. And we are watching a combination of all these historical events going on now, right, that promote these different themes. Now, I have already spoken about, right, that Esav does tshuva extensively, so I'm not going to go into that, but Esav does tshuva, and I mentioned how Esav does tshuva in the form of Trump. I mentioned that Trump appears to be a messianic figure, but he's a messianic figure in terms of Esav doing tshuva, which we know, and this has come to be. That he, even though he has faults, we all know that, obviously, but by and large, he's a person that has morals, by and large. I mean, I'm talking about, publicly. He's not, he's not, I'm not in any way saying that Trump is a tzaddik, of course not. But by and large, when you compare him to the rest of the American government and so on, there's not even a comparison. So Trump himself is a messianic figure. That's Esav doing tshuva, especially in the area of assisting the Jewish people with the Abraham Accords, in terms of Israel being independent, Jerusalem being the capital, the Golan being part of Israel. I mean, he has done enormous amount of good things for the Jewish people, for the Israel and so on. He has dealt with the Arabs, confronted the UN, and so on. So Trump is the major historical event in terms of Esav doing tshuva, you see. And together with him, it's not just him. I mean, he's the main person. But you have all those people that voted for him, that in a certain sense are moral, all the MAGAs, as they call them, they're part of that movement to do good and to and not be amoral or anti-moral and so on. So that event of the rise of Trump, which really people are stunned at his rise because it was miraculous and so on. That is because of the spiritual necessity of Esav in the end doing tshuva and being part of the tikkun process. That's a very important idea. Now, we also obviously see the rise of what's called the evil of Esav and the evil that they are doing. We know who they are. It's the government, that is the White House, that is the Democrats, the liberals, the progressive. They are destroying America. This is their last fling. And they are destroying not just America, but America is the beacon to the entire world. And they are destroying the world. America is destroying the world, which is astounding, you see. And the way they're destroying everybody, we see, of course, is the allowance of the LGBTQ plus movement to flourish, to proliferate, you see, and to be incredibly successful, where that movement is not only the homosexuality and so on, is not only, present, but it is preferred, you see, and it's in the form of being woke and so on. It's, incredible madness has seized America, you see, and therefore, because they have promoted this, and the concept of, like I say, wokeism and CRTs, the idea, the concept of racism and so on, which they have enormously falsified and so on. They, with all of that, are destroying America. So that is the evil and of America. America is a beacon to the entire world. So this is spreading this concept of wokeism, concept of LGBTQ, the concept of transgender. All of this is unbelievably decadent and, destroying the morality of the world and so on. So that's their last fling, and they're doing it. So that's the second idea of the events happening because of the spiritual necessity that they are allowed to exercise the last of their evil before they go out. You see, that's the second idea. Now then we have a third idea, where Edom or Esav has to be punished. Now we go back, we go back and we take a look at a medrash, because that's where I believe the secret of what is happening in terms of that theme, that Esav has to be punished. Now who has to be punished? Edom. Now there's a medrash. It's a both a Yalkut Shimoni in Yeshaya Samach Gimel, Perek Samach Gimel, which is 63, and it's also in a Yalkut Reuveni in Chelik Beis at the end. Here's what it says, which is remarkable, very important. Okay, and this will, I believe, will explain the enormous, irrational, persistent, continuous persecution of Donald Trump, which makes no sense. Because the question is, this has never happened before. You may disagree with the president, you disagree with his policies, and you oppose it in whatever political fashion and so on. But what is happening to Donald Trump is beyond belief. We've never seen that before, The constant, first of all, the persecutions are constant. They don't stop, you see. Not only that, they are irrational, you see, because Trump has done great things for America. So why are they persecuting him? Even if you disagree with his policies, or if you don't like his character, his tweets and so on. But he has done a great job for America, economically, in terms of foreign affairs, and so on. Everybody was in fear of him, and therefore nobody, the Russian war with Ukraine would never have happened. Afghanistan would, the ridiculous, leaving of Afghanistan would never have happened. China certainly would not invade Taiwan. A great deal, and not only that, there would be no southern border that is flooding America. There would be no fentanyl. It's incredible. So what he's done is the tremendous amount of good. So even if you don't like the guy's character, but his competence is superb. So why are the vast people of America, why do they hate this man so much? And it is persistent. They call it Trump derangement syndrome. Why? What kind of Akaras HaTov is that toward a person that has helped so many Americans thrive and flourish, even if you don't like a guy's character? So what kind of gratitude is that to a person? Besides, nobody's ever seen that happen to a president. This has never happened in American history. This persistent and obsessive desire to destroy him. And that's really what it is. And like I say, it's irrational, because he has done a great deal of good for America. So this makes no sense. So it's irrational. It's obsessive, persistent, right? And it never stops. And it's in the extreme. Witness just the last couple of weeks that they have indicted him on some type of, it's not even a felony. It's a misdemeanor that nobody ever gets indicted. And besides, the indictment doesn't even list what the crime is. Yet they have not hesitated to try to destroy him with some kind of misdemeanor. It's just incredible to watch. What the DA of the Attorney General of New York has done. But it's not him only, it's the entire left, the entire Democratic Party. So how do we understand something which has never happened in American history? And he's a president, he was the former president of the United States. So where's the honor to the office itself? So I believe we can understand it based on this medrash. There's a pasuk in in Parshas Nitzavim, the Haftarah brings down a certain Haftarah that talks about God destroying Edom, which says, Yeshaya Hanavi sees God in a prophetic vision coming from Edom, you see, and God's garments, so to speak, are all red, blooded, all filled with blood. And of course, Yeshaya wants to know, that means God is now about to execute, or he has executed, tremendous amount of justice. And that's the symbolism of the garments being red. So he asks God, why are you coming? So God says, I'm not coming for the Jewish people. I am coming from Edom, right? And I've just stepped on them, like somebody steps on grapes to squash them and to eject the juice of the grapes. So that's what I did. I just stepped all over Edom to destroy them, and their blood has spurted out of their bodies and come onto my garments. Could you imagine this is what God is going to do to Edom in the end of time, the punishment that Edom will receive, you see. And this is the Haftarah of Parshas Nitzavim, which, by the way, was the week of 9/11, which is fascinating. That's what he did to Edom in the week that 9/11, that the Twin Towers collapsed. In any case, so there is a Yalkut Shimoni, which is a medrash, and it's also in a Yalkut Reuveni, which is also a medrash, that says the following. It says, Hashem noitel kol averos shel Yisrael, that God took all the sins of the Jews, right, which was caused, right, by Esav, by the climate created by Esav. Then it says, v'noisnam, and he places all these sins, or the cause of all these sins, right, al Esav harasha, on Esav harasha. In other words, God is now about to punish Esav, not only for the slaughter of the Jews, but for the fact that Esav has created a civilization of enormous depravity and decadence that has caused Jews to be enticed to sin. That's how far the justice of God goes. Anyway, this is what God is doing. This is what the Medrash says. Oma Esav, so Esav says to God, Bameh yesh bi koyach l'sevlam, where do I get the strength to be able to bear this suffering? It was Esav is admitting, yes, I deserve this. I'm not arguing about that. But I don't have the strength to bear this type of punishment because it's beyond belief what you're about to do to me. This is what Esav says to God. So it says in the Medrash, Shiur, at that moment when Esav makes that remark, right? Because that is really a remark, in a certain sense, of tshuva, of charata. It's like Cain, when God said, where is your brother? And he said, am I my brother's keeper? So God then said, what have you done? You have killed Hevel, right? And therefore I will punish you, and so on. And Cain says, Godla avoini min soy, that my sin is greater than I can bear. It's true, but you're about to punish me in a way that I cannot even bear the punishment. Who can bear it? Who's got the strength for this? So therefore God diminished. He mitigated the suffering, because Cain, that was a statement of tshuva. It's really what it is. He admitted he did the sin, and he said, look, I deserve the punishment, but I can't bear this. So it's really a request for some type of mercy. The amazing thing is Esav is doing the same thing. When he says to God, I can't bear the iniquity, the punishment that you're about to give me. You see. So what does God do? Because Esav, in a certain sense, is doing tshuva. Right? So then it says, Be'osei Shiur, right? What God does is Noitel Hashem all the sins which he's about to visit on Esav, v'noisnom al begodov. So instead of doing it on his body, the punishment, he's going to do it on his clothing. You see? And then it says, v'nasu edumim, they become red. In other words, God diminished or mitigated the suffering that he was going to give to Esav, and instead did it to his clothing, whatever that means, and not to his physical body, and so on. And that was a softening, a mitigation of the punishment to Esav, you see. So then it says in the Medrash, Veshuv, and God continued, Mechapsam, to do this until Shenasam Kisheleg. In other words, God continued to visit punishment on Esav, on his clothing, until the clothing became white as snow, which means God effected a atonement for Esav. This is what the Medrash says, which is amazing when you think about that, And in other words, so Esav, in a certain sense, was forgiven. He went through the punishment. God mitigated his punishment. He went through it, right? And he suffered. The extent of his suffering was so great that all his sins were forgiven, you see. And that's where we see, that in the end, Esav, that's one of the places where we see that Esav does tshuva. So what God did is he brought Esav back into the circle of those people who bring tikkun. And by the way, that is justified. First of all, we know there's a Gemara actually in Saita where Esav tried to block Yaakov's being buried in the Moras HaMachpelah, because he said, "Wait a minute, what are you doing? You can't be buried in the Moras HaMachpelah. I received that also as an inheritance, right? The Moras HaMachpelah, and you gave away your spot, right, to Leah, right? So you're taking my spot." In any case, he delayed or blocked. So they said to him, "What do you mean? You sold it. When you sold the firstborn, you sold all the rights that you had as a firstborn, right? And that is part of it, is the Moras HaMachpelah, right, which is in Hebron." So Esav said, "Well, where's the document?" So the document was in Egypt. So they sent us Naphtali, who was very skilled in running and so on. Anyway, send them back to get the document from Egypt, you see. Meanwhile, Husham, the son of Dun, right, he was apparently couldn't hear, right, and so on. And what happened is that he saw, well, what's going on here? You see, all he saw that Esav was preventing Yaakov from being buried, right? And that's a tremendous bizoy and embarrassment to the body of Yaakov Avinu. So what he did is I think he took his sword and he chopped off the head of Esav, killed him. And it says that the head of Esav rolled into the kever at the foot and it's at the foot of Yaakov Avinu, you see. So the question, of course, is what is Esav's head doing in the Moras HaMachpelah among these tzaddikim, right? Because we know you have the four couples, who are buried there. You have Adam and Chava, you have Avram and Sarah, you have Yitzchak and Rivka, and you have Yaakov and Leah. So what is the head of Esav doing in the Moras HaMachpelah? And the idea is that it's amazing that God caused this to happen, so the body of Esav is in the field, not in the Moras HaMachpelah, but the head, which is the mind, which is the part that did tshuva, that is allowed to be, in the Moras HaMachpelah. And that shows you that Esav did tshuva. If he hadn't done tshuva, that would never have happened. In any case, then the second idea is that the chazir, the pig, which is treif, we know that, will be kosher, Chazal tell us, at the end of time. And the chazir, which is the pig, which we cannot eat, right, is treif, right? That represents Esav. And that will be kosher. Why? Because Esav will be kosher, so therefore that pig will also be kosher. And then there's another medrash that said that Esav somehow weaseled his way into Gan Eden. He was actually at a higher level. So God said, what are you doing here at this level? So God evicted him from that level in Gan Eden. And of course the question is, what in the world is Esav doing in Gan Eden? And again, it's because of the tshuva that he did. So we see that in the end of time, God mitigates and turns the sins of Esav white, which means he offers him a complete kapora, complete atonement, you see. So therefore, the punishment is a critical necessity for Esav to resume, some aspect of what he was. This is what we see. And in many ways, how do we see this? So I believe what this means, is as follows. And what it says that God says, I will now, bring this punishment on your clothing, what God is saying is that you will be punished. In what way? And let's take a look at what's happening. We know what's happening to Trump, which is beyond belief. I believe Trump as a messianic figure who represents, therefore, Esav, because that's really what he represents. A president of the United States represents Esav. That's because the United States is an aspect of Esav. So therefore, Trump bears the iniquity of Esav. And what God therefore has said is that you represent Esav as president or former president. You must bear the iniquity of Esav. You see, so what I will do is allow Esav himself to persecute you continuously. And in many ways, that's what's happening. The ongoing persecution, right, of Trump does not stop. And when God says that I will mitigate it by not doing it to your body, what he means is that you won't be found guilty in the sense of being thrown into prison, denied your freedom. Instead, they will persecute you based on your activities. But you will not be found guilty where you have to go to prison. But your activities, right, they will litigate your activities continuously. And that punishment, and that's an enormous amount of punishment, to have to go through that. It's just astounding how Trump was able to survive that. He should have had 5 heart attacks by now. But in any case, that he's able to suffer this, and all of these persecutions are on the activities of Trump. With the documents, we're familiar with the charges being brought against him, and so on, and the indictment, the financials and so on, the Russian collusion. All of this is on the activities of Trump. I believe that Trump represents Esav as the president of the United States, and he is being persecuted by Esav, which is amazing. The evil of Esav is persecuting, right, the good part of Esav, and Trump represents that. So in a certain sense, I believe Trump is bearing the punishment that has to come to Esav in order for Esav to come back into, the ability to help the Jewish people do the tikkun. You see. Now what is amazing is that the punishment that Trump is bearing really is, in a certain sense, identical, not a total sense, but a certain sense, to the punishment of the Jewish people. One of the great punishments that God visits upon the Jews is called anti-Semitism. What is anti-Semitism? It's an abiding hatred of Jews, and it's irrational because the Jews have given so much to the world. Why do you hate them so much? Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons for that, but it's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. The Jews are so small in number, even if they are in many ways, part of the governing position of countries and so on, but they have done such good for the people of the world, whether it be in medicine, whether it be in science and whatever. They have contributed so much to the world. What are you doing with these people? Anti-Semitism is not rational. It never stops. And it just comes out of nowhere. You see, in any case, this is what's happening to the Jews. So God says that your punishment will be, in many ways, very similar to the anti-Semitism of the Jews. But who is going to punish you? So the Goyim do this to the Jews. But who is going to do it to Esav, anti-Semitism? In other words, you have to experience what the Jews have experienced, right, over the thousands of years. But who's giving them? So I call it anti-Edomism, not anti-Semitism. It's not against Jews. It's against Edom himself. And that is the form of punishment that God is doing to Trump. And that is what's happening. So it is the evil of Esav that is persecuting Trump himself. And that is an identical idea to anti-Semitism, which is amazing when you think about it, you see. So what I'm trying to do is explain the illogic and the irrationality of what is happening and the historical, never happened before, what's happening to Donald Trump and so on, So he is actually experiencing the phenomenon called anti-Semitism. But it's coming from Goyim. So instead of being visited on Jews, they are doing it to him. And it's not only him who represents Esav, but it's also to the 75 million people that voted for Trump, you see. So this irrational hatred, which is now on the MAGA, those people who are for Trump and voted for him, the hatred of the progressives is also being applied to the MAGA Trumps and so on, you see. So America really is at civil war with each other. America is a tremendously divided country, and in a certain sense, all you need is one event to spark a military civil war, right? America is very close to replicating the civil war that happened in 1862 or 3 or whatever, you see. That's how divided America is on the values itself. They were divided on the value of slavery to such an extent where there was a civil war. But America, the values of the progressives versus the value of those people who great is incredible, and so on. So therefore, America is at this. So one part of America is persecuting the other part of America, you see. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, you take a look at what's happening to the cities of America, the crime, right? The southern border, the fentanyl, killing people, right? Then you have the inflation, you see. Then you have America in many ways is at war with itself. One part of America is persecuting the other part of America. Does America understand this? That they are really a civil war? But in any case, that is part of the punishment of the good part of Esav, which is represented by Trump and his people who voted for him, all the MAGAs. You see, so that theme, that Esav has to be punished with an identical type of persecution that the Jews went through, it explains the concept of in the end of time, Edom, the good part of Edom, has to be punished. And they are being punished by America itself, which is in many ways a phenomenon which is identical to anti-Semitism. And you think about that, it's really amazing. And that's why they can't nail Trump at all. So all the litigation of Trump is against his activities, but they can't find him guilty, so they cannot find him guilty where all of a sudden he has to go to prison or whatever. That is the diminishment of what God said, I will do it to your clothing. In any case. And then you have the concept that Edom has to be overthrown, right? And we are watching that the progressives, the Democratic Party, is losing. They are slowly being overthrown. There's a tremendous amount of scandals that is being, exposed about Biden, Joe Biden himself, Hunter Biden, his son. They just found out that even the letter, that Biden, President Biden, said about that the letter that he said was signed by 51 members of the intelligence community that said that the hard drive of Hunter Biden was really Russian disinformation. They now found out that that letter is a fraud, is fake, and that the one who requested that letter from a member of the CIA is Blinken, Anthony Blinken, which is incredible. And this letter is a fraud. So when that scandal comes out, that's going to be enormous damage to Joe Biden. So we see that the Russian is slowly taking apart the wokeism and so on, and of the Democratic Party and so on. So therefore, Edom is being overthrown. So this sort of explains, to a certain extent, what is happening in America based on these four themes. Now, there's something else happening which is very, very important. What is that? And that comes from the concept from the Chet HaEgel. When the Jews sinned, so Moshe Rabbeinu came down the mountain and he said, Mi L'Hashem Elai. He said to them, who is to God? Come to me. You see. Now, what does Moshe Rabbeinu mean? I mean, God knows who sinned. So what is Moshe Rabbeinu really doing? You see, God doesn't need Moshe Rabbeinu to separate the people who sinned at the golden calf and the people who did not worship or worship the golden calf. God knows that. He doesn't need Moshe Rabbeinu to do the separation, of these people. But what Moshe did is what's called a very important idea, which God does. It's called birur. Many times when God wants to, initiate some tremendous period of good, he allows the Jews to do tshuva. So he will actually offer them and say, okay, who wants to do tshuva before I initiate punishment and a different era? So what Moshe Rabbeinu did is he offered the Jews an opportunity to do tshuva. And that's what he said. He said, who is to God? Come to me. You see? In other words, even though you did the Chet HaEgel, even though you sinned, but if you come to God, if you are still loyal to God, right, then you will survive. So what he's doing is what's called a birur. He's offering Jews who sinned, right? He doesn't say who didn't sin with the golden calf. He said, who is to God? It means who remains loyal to God? Come to me and you will survive. So what he did is he offered them an opportunity to do tshuva before God initiates punishment. And that is called a birur. That is a very important process. Now, since we are about to witness a messianic time, arrival, God is doing a tremendous birur to the world and to the Jewish people. Not everybody is going to survive the messianic era or the incoming of the Mashiach. God is subjecting. First, let me deal with the Jewish people. God is subjecting the Jewish people to a bureau. He's giving them a last chance. This is what we are seeing in Israel. There's a war going on. It is not a war between the Supreme Court and the Knesset. That's what it looks like, where they want to do judicial reform. Right? It's not even a war between the right and the left. If you think about it, what is it all about? Well, the right won, and they want to change the judicial, they want to institute judicial reform because the Supreme Court are dictators. Israel is not a democracy. A democracy is where people, right, they decide who the government is. It is the rule of the majority of people. That's what a democracy is, you see. And the one who determines the government of Israel is the Supreme Court, because they can veto any bill of the Knesset. This isn't democratic. They're not voted at all, you see. So Israel is not a democracy. It's a fraud, which is really what it is. It's an oligarchy run by a group of Supreme Court justices, whatever they are, how many there are, whatever, and so on, that have the ability to rule without any voting or by the people of Israel. It is the Knesset that is the democracy, not the Supreme Court. Yet the Supreme Court since 1992, because of Aaron Barak, rules Israel. And then you have the Attorney General of the government that represents the Supreme Court, actually can tell the Knesset that we don't want your law. You see, they can actually negate a law of the Knesset. The Attorney General, of course, is appointed, right? But in any case, this is insane. So what they want to do is judicial reform and curb severely the rule of Supreme Court, not remove it because you need a Supreme Court, but to curb the undemocratic ruling of them. This is what they want to do. Now, the left has gone crazy over this. We know why. Because they have been voted out of the government, and the only way they have any influence is through the Supreme Court. So in a certain sense, it is a death struggle to remain in power and to remain in influence. So they are vying against the right. But wait a minute. But the right, whatever the Haredim, there's Netanyahu and so on, they have won. You see? So how could you negate them? And so on. And that, of course, is that the Israeli left is destroying democracy. And the amazing thing is that they say on the right that the right is destroying democracy, which of course is ludicrous. They don't even understand what democracy is. The right has the right to issue laws because they were voted in by the majority of Israel. So how could the left be doing this? And certainly not declaring the whole thing to be, anti-democratic. In any case, we are witnessing a civil war. That's really what's happening in Israel, you see. But what it really is, and that's why, because the left does not want to give up their power, and therefore the whole thing, it's really a fight to the death. The left, of course, is the Erev Rav. They do not want to go away. They don't want to give up any power. So they are willing to overthrow the government. And that's really what they want to do. They want to overthrow the government. So what we are witnessing is an incredible thing. We are witnessing the Erev Rav's refusal, which is the left, refusal to leave because of an election. I mean, Israel is supposed to be a democracy, which it's not, and they don't want to leave. So in a certain sense, it's an insurrection. It's really what it is. And it carries with it the punishment of treason. If you don't like what the right is doing, so you'll have an election and you'll vote them out. But you don't ignore their rules and their laws and defy them. This is what they're doing. What is it really? they are fighting for any kind of semblance of religion. There's an incredible amount of hatred of Haredim, religion in Israel, where in many ways they want to discard religion. They claim because they're afraid that the right, the Haredim, will take over Israel and become a theocracy, which is a completely false. You see, the Haredim just want some type of freedom to do whatever they do. You see, and that Israel should represent Judaism, and the left doesn't want any form of Judaism. You see, so what you're witnessing is a war against who? It's a war against God. This is what's happening. We are witnessing a Dor HaFlaga, the Tower of Babel, where they actually went to war against God by building a tower. The Erev Rav, that is destroying Israel, because it's producing a civil war, insurrection, does not want really any vestige of Judaism in Israel. You see, and as such, they are destroying whatever's left of the democracy of Israel. So we're witnessing a war. Why is God allowing this to happen? Because this is a birur. God is about to bring the Mashiach, and he wants to end the evil of the world, you see. So he's saying, before I bring the Mashiach, who will deserve to be in the Messianic era? Well, I'm going to give all you Erev Rav guys a chance to do tshuva. You see, I'm going to make it easy for you, where your insurrection is a clear demonstration of anti-democracy. So it's not only you want to reject, the right, you should not reject the right, because why do you want no vestige of Judaism in Israel? But it's anti-democratic. But they don't even look at that. That's how emotionally obsessed they are to remove Judaism in any way in the state of Israel. It's a birur, which is very bad, because if the Erev Rav fails, and apparently they're failing, there's a tremendous amount of demonstrations and hatred of the Haredim in Israel. They are failing the birur, and who knows what the consequences of that are. Who knows if they will be zeicha to see the Mashiach. Now, they'll get Olam Haba. That's a different story. But to live in the Messianic age, we don't know if they will be zeicha, because they are failing the birur. It's a war against God, like the Dor HaFlaga. It's an insurrection, not only against democracy, but it's an insurrection against Judaism. You see, any symbol of Judaism. So this is really what's going on in Israel. This civil war, which can easily erupt into a military civil war, can easily get out of hand and so on, is fundamentally a birur that God is instituting to see who will be around in the Messianic era and who will not be around. You see, so I'm giving you one last chance, to declare loyalty, not only to make Israel a real democracy, which it's not, but to allow Judaism to exist and to flourish in Israel. That's the whole point of the Tikkun and so on. So that's really what's happening in Israel, and that's why it's happening. This kind of stuff really has never really happened before, where Israel is in many ways at the brink of a war. What Netanyahu did, which I will comment on, is a tremendous mistake. They say when you are king, then be a king. You can't do that. It's funny. I remember when there was a strike of the air tower controllers, in the time of Reagan, and they all went on strike. Imagine all these personnel that are on the air towers and the airports, they all went on strike. So what Reagan did is he fired them all. He wasn't going to take this. You see, what Netanyahu has done is he has created an incredible vulnerability in democracy. He has severely weakened the whole concept of democracy by showing that if you insurrect, right, you can actually overthrow the government. But that's treason, right? This is what's going on. So what Netanyahu did was terrible. Netanyahu, the problem with him is that he's always trying to make peace, which is fine, but not at the expense of loyalty and the ability of the government to survive and persist. So by showing that if you rebel or defy the government, that he will back off and allow this to go on, that's terrible. What he should have done is confronted all of them. You can't do this. Then we're not even a democracy. You see, he should have done what Reagan did, but he didn't. Big mistake, for which they will suffer, because the left will never give up, because they want the power. They want the power, and they will never give up. And the power of the left is the Supreme Court, because they basically always rule against the Haredim, against Judaism. They are, in many ways, a terrible obstruction to the rule of democracy. So the Birur is happening in Eretz Israel. And by the way, the Birur also happened in America, you see, because the LGBTQ is destroying America. I had mentioned before that that's what sealed the decree of the Mabul, of the flood, is that the world was incredibly LGBTQ in whatever form, you see, because I mentioned then that that's what sealed the fate of the Dor HaMabul, the generation of the flood. So what God has said, so the problem is the government, the people of America could say, well, what do you want from us? Right? It's the government that is pushing LGBTQ. And God said, okay, so I'm going to give you a midterm election. You have the ability, the whole America, to throw these guys out, the left, the Democratic Party. Instead, what did they do? They made the Senate into, they gave the ruling party, the Democratic Party, they gave them the right to rule the Senate. What kind of a business is this? And the House should have won much more votes, but instead they only won just maybe a handful of people. Again, so America, in a certain sense, has failed the Bureau. God gave them an opportunity to overthrow the Democratic Party. Instead, what did they do? They voted in the Democratic Party in the Senate, and they severely diminished the amount of power that the House has. It's Rachmanis. God had mercy on America, and he allowed the House to become Republican so they could straighten out the terrible injustices of what's going on in America. But America has fundamentally failed the Bureau process, you see. And now Israel is being subjected to the same thing. Now there's also something else which we have to remember. Israel is at the brink of war, not only civilly, but with the Arabs, because the Arabs see the tremendous overthrow, right, of the rule of law. And they see that Israel is divided. So now's the perfect time to go to war with Israel on all sides, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, and so on. Why is this happening? Because you should know one thing. The worst thing that the Jews can do is hate themselves. Lashon Hara creates sinas chinam. Do you know how much Lashon Hara is spoken because of this division in Israel? A tremendous amount. And there's a tremendous amount of sinas chinam, basis hatred, you see. So the punishment for that is that it awakens tremendous prosecutions in heaven. In other words, if you people hate each other, right, then I will allow right, the enemies of the Jews also to go to war with you, measure for measure. If you guys hate each other, sinas chinam, then I will allow people who really hate you, the enemies, right? I will allow them to go to war with you. So Israel is on the verge, in many ways, of a war with the Arabs. And that is a punishment for the incredible sinas chinam that is going on in Israel. So we are watching a tremendous amount of turmoil, chaos, and upheaval. Why? Like I said, because these are the things, the spiritual necessities that have to take place, right, before the Mashiach comes. And we are at the brink, we are at the verge of the Messianic era. And therefore, all of this is happening. The concept of punishment of Edom, which I mentioned, persecutions of Trump and the MAGA people, the Bureau of what's happening to America, the clarification, the choice of opportunity to do tshuva, which is what the Bureau is really all about, is happening in America and also certainly in Israel, and it's all happening at the same time. What I would suggest is be very careful with Shmiras HaLashon, with Lashon Hara, not speaking Lashon Hara, because that is generating tremendous kitrugim, prosecutions in heaven against the Jews, you see. And God forbid that could lead into a total war with the Arabs because of what's happening, measure for measure, you see. So we have to be careful with sinas chinam and Lashon Hara to reduce the amount of kitrugim, which is prosecutions, and so on, you see. In any case, I hope I've explained the enormous turmoil of what's happening in the world today, and we have to hope that this year will be the year that the Mashiach will come, and all of this nightmare will end. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. So where do you see DeSantis in all of this? Like, where does he play a role in it? Because he's obviously there, and he's lurking, behind Trump. So where do you find him? What role is he playing?
I will tell you something. Look, everybody sees a vulnerability in Trump. Everybody. But, in a certain sense, it's part of the punishment of Trump that he is threatened about resuming. I said before, I believe that once the punishment of Trump has ended, that he will resume being president. I believe that will happen. And I stated why. Because that's his purpose as a messianic figure, to redeem Esav. Because Esav is destroying America, is destroying the world. Now, in terms of, and so part of that punishment is by having a threat to his presidency. Trump is the most dangerous person, when you think about it, in the world. Why? Because he wants to change America. He wants to change America in the sense that he wants to make it a good country. You see, not only that, but the reason why Trump is so dangerous is because Trump has done tremendous amount of good for the Jewish people. So to the Satan, right, who is really now trying to do his best to, to come back and influence mankind and so on, because he's dying, as I mentioned previously, Trump is a very dangerous figure. And what the Satan has to do is get rid of Trump. The way to get rid of him is also to put another candidate that is viable, you see. So DeSantis is in many ways a satanic attempt to overthrow Trump, to get rid of him. Now, even though DeSantis also, even though...
Someone mute yourself. Someone mute yourselves.
Even though DeSantis in many ways is very, very similar, even though DeSantis in many ways is identical to Trump in terms of his policies, but he's not the same. He's not the same. And besides this, if you think about it, it's very possible, I believe it could happen, well, DeSantis will bow out. Why? First of all, DeSantis is 43. He doesn't need to run now. He has plenty of time. Secondly, DeSantis, right, can never tolerate the abuse that the Democratic Party has laid on Trump. He doesn't have that defiance ability. What they did to Trump is beyond belief. You have to be an extraordinary, emotionally strong person. I don't believe DeSantis is that way, you see. So he would make a big mistake running for president because they're going to try to destroy him. And like I say, he doesn't have the fortitude that Trump has, you see. Besides that, when Trump becomes president, he's going to destroy the Democratic Party. He underestimated the enormous resolve of evil to do what it does. He made a big mistake. He let Clinton go, and so on. There's a whole deep state that he did not deal with. What a mistake he made. And they are destroying him, you see. So the idea is that that was the mistake he made, and he will destroy the Democratic Party, or a lot of it, whatever. And DeSantis, if he runs after Trump, because Trump cannot run, as far as I know, again, so then DeSantis can run, and he will be a shoo-in, you see, and the Democratic Party will be severely reduced. So it's a big mistake for him. You see that God is on the side of Trump because God had the Democratic indict Trump on charges which are ludicrous. They're stupid. They don't even make any sense because the indictment itself doesn't even have a crime. You see. And I'm not even talking about the statute of limitations. You see. So God had them do that, which enormously upped the popularity of Trump. That's what it was for, is to put Trump back in the driver's seat. That's exactly what happened. In fact, since he was indicted, I think they've raised $20 million, which is a phenomenal amount of money. And there are many people that have switched, even if they were thinking about DeSantis, they have switched to go back to Trump because they realized, how do you do this? It's not only the Trump that they're doing it, they're doing this to the MAGAs. All the people who voted, they're making them look like absolute fools, you see. So people are livid with rage, you see. So you see clearly that God is on the side of Trump. So I believe DeSantis is nothing more than a satanic distraction to try to punish Trump. It's part of his punishment of Edom, right? And he's desperately trying to knock Trump out because Trump will assist the Jews to do the tikkun. So as far as the Southern is concerned, he's the most dangerous person of all.
Got it. So now, since today is Rosh Chodesh, what does the new month bring in for us, and how does it play into the Messianic process?
Well, Iyar is an interesting month. First of all, Iyar is the month of the spheres. We are counting the Sphira, and the Sphere, of course, is the removal of the influence of the Satan, the Tumah, the Memteshai Tumah, the 49 levels of evil, and we are in the middle of it. So, in that sense, the mazel of Iyar is a very good mazel. I mean, Nisan obviously would be incredible today, the last day of Nisan, even though it's a Rosh Chodesh, right? Nisan is obviously, like I said, very good. But Iyar is Aleph Yud Reish, which stands for Ani Hashem Rifecho. I am God, your healer. This is brought down. I don't remember who, maybe B'nai Yisoscho. That's what Iyar stands for. Ani Hashem, I am God, Rifecho, your healer. So Iyar is a month of healing because it's the time that we are slowly unraveling the Memtes, the 49 levels of Tumah. So you can't give up. Well, let's hope that somehow in Iyar, right, the evil, the Democratic Party, the Tumah, will continue to unravel and be destroyed. So it's a good month. Besides, today has not ended. Today's Friday, so it has not even ended. But I see this as a continuation of the destruction of evil. Look, every time the Democratic Party sees a turn against them, another revelation or scandal, means that there is a gezerah, a decree that God is destroying the Democratic Party. Because if Biden is found to be a corrupt family, which he is, they call it the Biden crime family, right? That will severely damage the Democratic Party from being in power. So we clearly see there's a gezerah against, evil, against the evil of Esav. So that's a very good sign. The only thing is that it seems to be taking a long time. But I explained why. Because there's certain spiritual necessities that have to be done first. One of them is the punishment of Esav, which is happening to Trump and all those people that voted. That takes time, and that has to come first before the gezerah is finalized against the Democratic Party. Look, everything has a timetable, and it just takes time. But the main thing you have to look at is that it's happening. The Democratic Party is being destroyed. Biden, people look at Biden, obviously, he's obviously severely mentally health damaged, you see, and then there's his family, and then there's so many people in the Democratic Party that are criminals. I mean, we're looking here against what? We're looking here against the, Merrick Garland, who clearly represents Biden. I mean, I forget about all the things that he does, which are terrible, So you're looking at him, you're looking at the FBI, which is now an organization that has been severely, has severely declined in honesty and integrity. Their reputation is enormously damaged. People are even saying to replace them, Then you have the CIA, the intelligence community. There's so many aspects of the government, right, that is being damaged. All of this takes time, you see.
But Rabbi,
and we also have the concept of the Bureau. Yes?
But there are 11 people that are Jewish that are running the government. And doesn't that cause anti-Semitism more so?
Well, not really. I mean, on the contrary, the Democratic Party is for them. You should know one thing. These 11 people that you mentioned, right, that run the government, they're the Erev Rav. We tend to think that there's an Erev Rav, right? There's a Jewish population that is against God. We tend to think of them in Israel. But it's not true. There's an Erev Rav in America. And the Erev Rav is these guys, is Merrick Garland, Chuck Schumer, right? And so on. Blinken, who's Jewish, by the way, Sullivan, who's Jewish, they are against Israel. They are trying to severely harm Israel by siding with the Arabs. God apparently seems to, he's going to take out Blinken because of this scandal as a punishment for what he's doing. But these people are the Erev Rav. That's who they are.
Okay.
Rabbi, what about the Arabs? When they're persecuting us too? When is their day coming?
We don't know when their day's coming. But again, evil has an ability through justice to proliferate. It's called Tigbar Sarah, the proliferation of evil. You see, and I once spoke about why that happens. One of the concepts is the satisfaction of justice. They have a right, if good diminishes, they have a right to rule, because that's what they say. And besides, all this demonstrates one thing. The stronger evil becomes, then when God destroys them, that will advertise his strength. To destroy a strong enemy is much greater advertisement of who you are than to destroy a very weak enemy. So one of the reasons, which I mentioned a long time ago, one of the reasons why evil is able to enormously exhibit might is to show that when God does destroy them, it shows the might of God. That's one of the reasons why they're able to do that. In other words, there are many reasons. But this is what happens at the end of time. Tigbera Surah, you see.
Rabbi, did you see what happened with the Muslims in their mosque on Ramadan? They went to pray to bow down, and suddenly all roaches started coming out from under the ground, and they were all running. They couldn't bow down to pray this week.
When did that happen? This week?
It looked like a macaw.
Wow. That's a bad sign.
Yeah.
Right. Look, remember one thing. Evil is able to dominate up to a certain point. As soon as their ability to dominate ends, they are immediately destroyed. You see, that's what happens. You see. So we don't know the end point. I mean, we see that from Avram Avinu, where Avram Avinu, God said, was supposed to get Eretz Yisrael. So the Torah says, V'akanani oz ba'oretz. Their time has not come to be thrown out. God has an exact reckoning of what can dominate and how long. The only thing we know is that when the time comes that they have to be overthrown, they are overthrown immediately. God does not dilly-dally. He doesn't do that. He overthrows them immediately. Like it says, miyad yoived, immediately they're destroyed. We don't know necessarily, we don't know when, we don't know why, but God has this in mind. The Arabs will, I mentioned, that for what they are doing, those Arabs will be destroyed. Hopefully Iran will be overthrown, so Israel does not even have to go to war with Iran, because there's a tremendous revolution now happening in Iran. One thing is clear, that we are about to witness stupendous events that's going to be happening. Remember, the redemption is something that has never happened the way it really has to happen. We saw a demonstration of it in Egypt, where God overturned nature to demonstrate that he is willing to overturn nature to free the Jews. That's how valuable they are. He's going to do the same thing at the end of time, but much greater. The miracles that will happen before the Mashiach comes will tremendously outshine the miracles that happened by Egypt. And that's going to happen. But it takes time. Like I say, there are prerequisites that have to happen. This is what's going on. And this is unfolding. We have to be patient, and we have to believe that ultimately God will wipe out all these people. I mean, if you ever take a look at the Navi, especially Yeshaya, when he talks about God's salvation of the Jews, it's unbelievable, the time period of what that means. The good that will be here, you see, and the good and the pleasure, the justice, the peace, it'll be beyond belief. You won't believe the turnaround when it does happen. But it will happen. We just have to hope that it will happen this year, maybe this month, you see. But it will happen.
Rabbi, the House just passed the law that only women could participate in sports, not transgender, and now the president vowed to veto the bill. Evil.
Right, because, the whole concept that a person can determine his gender, I mean, it's ridiculous, So, of course, the guy says, I'm a woman, and he participates in the women's sports, and, of course, he's stronger than them. So the whole thing is ridiculous, you see. So, of course, they had to pass the law. But it's a slap in their face. It is a contradiction to their idea that you could be whatever you want. Yeah. So it's the beginning of a come down, you see, or a reversal of this stupidity that you could decide what gender you are. Look, what they're doing to the youth is intolerable and inexcusable. It's really unforgivable.
They even have, or they started doing in Disney World, a transgender night.
Yeah. Right. Look, this is the domination of evil. Right. All of this is happening simultaneously. And that's incredible. All of this is happening simultaneously, which is what I mentioned. The tshuva v'esav, right? The tshuva v'esav is happening. Edom's last fling, and then Edom being punished, and Edom being overthrown. And the Bira. I mean, it's amazing when you think about that. All of these ideas, themes, are occurring simultaneously. It's incredible. Why? Because God wants to bring the Geula, the redemption. So he's not doing one after the other, consecutively. He's doing it simultaneously. That shows you that God is in a rush. That's what it means. When God does things simultaneously, especially all of these major ideas that have to happen before the redemption, that means God is in a rush, which is great. Or else he could have done it consecutively, each thing happening by itself, taking 20, 30 years. So that'd be another 100, 200 years to go. But the fact that God wants to end it now, right? Look, I mentioned this Zohar many times. The Raya Mehemna, the Zohar, which the Leshem, famous Rabbi Eliashiv and so on, brings, that the Geula will happen 210 years before the end of time, which means that the Geula will happen within 7 years, or by 7 years, that Tchias HaMesim will begin. Well, there you are. That's why everything is happening simultaneously. You see? God is in a rush. Good news.
So, Rabbi, maybe also does the chaos in the world conceal maybe Mashiach ben Yosef?
Yes. He certainly is concealed, because if the identity of the Mashiach ben Yosef was known, the Satan would try to destroy him. God is always hiding the identity of the neshama of the Mashiach ben Yosef. And in the generation that he comes, he must be hidden. You see, or else the Satan will actively seek to destroy the Mashiach ben Yosef. Because obviously, Mashiach ben Yosef is the end of the Satan. You see, there are many midrashim of that. There's a medrash Yalkut Shimoni where it says that God looks forward or anticipates the Mashiach, the light of the Mashiach. So then it says that the Satan sees the light. Actually says this, and the Satan says, "What is that light?" So God said, "That is the light of the Messiah that will someday destroy you, overthrow you, and destroy you." So the Satan says, "Can I see it?" This is an interesting medrash. Yalkut Shimoni. In any case, so the Satan says to God, "Can I see it?" So God says, "You want to see it? Okay." So God reveals or shows him the light, which we don't really know what that is. Obviously, it's a revelation of the Einoi Muvada or whatever. So it says in the Medrash that when the Satan saw that, he shook with fear, because he realized that this light can truly destroy him. It's interesting. But what I like the fact that it says that a Kadosh Baruch Hu, the expression in Hebrew is metzapeh, looks forward to. It's not that God is waiting for this. It says metzapeh, he looks forward to the redemption. And I believe we are now witnessing that since God is having everything happen together, all the themes that I said are happening simultaneously, this is the tzipui. This is where God is looking forward, whereas he is excited and he wants to bring the Mashiach now. But there are requirements, prerequisites, and they are all happening now. So you have to look at that. The simultaneity of all of these events happening together at the same time means that the Mashiach is right around the corner. And when you think about that Zoya, that Chias HaMesim will begin by 2030, which is what? Less than 7 years from now. That's why it's all happening now. So we are about to witness spectacular events. I mean, really spectacular. That's going to make, the Egyptian redemption, it'll make it look like, a birthday party. That's how great the ultimate redemption will be.
Rabbi, I have a question. When the people, let's say the Jews, you said about how we have to be careful what we say about Lashon Hara, but wouldn't you consider the left as Apikuris or Rishaim? Wouldn't you consider them that? So then you would be okay negatively about them?
That is a question halachically in terms of Lashon Hara. There's a thing called Tinuk Shenishba. That means a tinuk, which is a child that was captured as a captive, kidnapped by Goyim very young. So this child knows nothing about Judaism. So the question is he a Russia, or is it a new category called Tinuk Shenishba? And there are halachic discussions about the Jews today, in America, or many of the secular Jews. What are they considered? So there are some people that consider them Rishonim. I mean, in act they are Rishonim. The question is, what is their culpability? Because it is their culpability, the fact that they do it deliberately, and they know it's wrong. That's what makes them a Russia. But if they don't know that it's a sin, then they are not. So the question is, those people that defy God, that do not want any Judaism. I mean, take a guy like Lapid. I mean, the man is incredibly evil. He's Malchin. Malchin means to inform on Israel to America. He is actually one of the people responsible for America beginning to distance itself and the Jewish community in America to distance itself from the Jewish people in Israel. I mean, you can't even believe what the punishment will be to Lapid, Yair Lapid. Yet he is doing it. So what is he? I would imagine that he is clearly a Russia, but what about all the other secular Jews in Israel? Halachically, they may be Tinuk Shenishba, and so on. That's really a halachic question, and so on. But the key idea is that I believe Lashon Hara is promoting a tremendous kitruk and a possible war with the Arabs, because that's the punishment.
Okay, and then also my next question is, what needs to happen in order for Mashiach ben Yosef to be able to be revealed that the Satan won't have a hold on him anymore? Because he can't be revealed now because we can't have the Satan know who he is. So when can we have him be revealed?
The answer to your question is that there is a deadline. Because the Mashiach is going to come not because of the merit of Israel. Not at all. He's going to come because of the timeline. Be'itoi. This is the time that Daniel saw and Yaakov Avinu saw. Because God swore that he would bring the redemption. Therefore, the redemption must happen. And it will happen in a time, that nobody knows. Only those two people were the only ones who knew when the Mashiach will really come. So it must happen, and what will bring him is be'itoi, in its time. The merit will not happen. You see. In fact, it says in that Haftarah that I quoted, in the Haftarah of Nitzavim, where God destroys Edom, and the blood of Edom splatters on this clothing of God, where God says, I did it for my righteousness, and there was nobody with me. So they learn, what do you mean there was nobody with you? Means, which is really very interesting. God says, I did not do it because of any merit or schut of the Jewish people. They have no merits for me to do this. I did it because of my righteousness. I did it because I want to do it. I am God, and my will rule, will exist, will prevail. And that's why I did it. So that tells you that there's really no merit that we have that will bring the Mashiach. And what will bring him is a deadline. We don't know when the deadline is, but it's obviously fast approaching. Remember what I said. The simultaneity of these events shows us that there's an incredible urgency to bring the redemption. And I believe the urgency was caused by America. When they made constitutional LGBTQ, then they did the exact same thing that the flood generation did, and that's where they were destroyed. They made it constitutional, which means it will not be overturned, which means America will now begin to destroy the world morally. I believe that created the real urgency. And like I once pointed out, that law was made, I think it was June 26th, by the Supreme Court, by Anthony Kennedy. Terrible. And Trump came down the escalator a couple of days before, I think on June 16th. All this happened in 2015. So what the Supreme Court did, and they were talking about it and so on, I believe created the urgency, and I believe that's what brought Trump down to begin the whole process of changing Edom and allowing them to do tshuva. You see.
So we
Okay.
need to just know who he is. I don't know what's taking him so long.
Well, look, someday we'll all know. But I'm just telling you, it's spectacular, and that is the sign that it's coming very rapidly. The whole concept of the simultaneity of all these events that are required. We just have to be patient.
It's just remarkable that they're doing so many evil things and the world's allowing these laws to be passed.
Right.
They're doing a new bill now that you can have relations with a minor if it's consensual. There's no age limit.
Is that a law?
They're trying children. It's crazy.
Is that a law?
Yeah, they're making a new law.
Who's they? Congress or New York?
The government.
Which government?
U.S.
Oh, you mean Congress, federal?
I don't know.
That's incredible, yeah.
They want to lower the age. There should be no age limit. If young child wants to do something, if they say yes, it's fine. That means they're going to raise children with the same laws of the flood. There's no all the laws are for the victim, not for the guilty party, not protecting the.
You mean the perpetrator? Yeah, right. Well, that's well, look, the world has become mad. That's really what we're witnessing. Once God has allowed evil to dominate, then they dominate. It's become a hefker. It means they realize they can now pass any law that they want. Look, what's behind evil? To defy God. That's all it is. It's a defiance of the morals, the ethics, the laws of God. And the way they do that is by going down to the lowest degree of corruption, the lowest degree. And what you're witnessing is the lowest degree. It's the greatest evil of all, you see. That's what's happening. I mean, look, they murder kids, abortions. They teach them transgender. It's incredible what they're doing to the youth, kindergarten kids, you see. And now you mention this. And then, of course, in colleges, it's all about communism. It's unbelievable what's happening to the world, you know. That's what happens when God allows evil to dominate. They go completely wild. They're mad. And I believe that's what's creating an enormous urgency for God to do all of these things simultaneously. He wants to end it now.